Hi, Anita. How are you?
Good. How are you tonight?
I'm doing all right.
You getting lots of storms up there?
Nothing too bad. We got some rain. What about you?
Got a few storms, but not bad. But supposed to be some more coming in tonight.
Okay. How you been doing? How you feeling?
Pretty good. Just because I had I guess the pupil is dilated, so I don't know how I get to go back down, but I'm seeing double when I look out both eyes. So I guess I'm going to wear a patch for a while.
Oh yeah.
To go calm down.
Uh, How bad is your neck?
Legs were swollen for probably get over it.
You said your
A
legs
lot
were swollen?
worse. Pardon?
You said your legs were swollen?
Yeah, from the airbags.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I read an article one day. It said the airbags come out 200 miles an hour. No
Wow.
wonder you get hit hard with it. Yeah, they had to cut me out, but I don't remember anything about the wreck, so I guess that might be a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I volunteered
I
for local
was
fire.
just a messenger, so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's never good when it's that bad.
If they're having trouble getting on, I got an email from Justin. That's the one I got on.
Yeah, Laura says it's not working for her.
Did she try to send her the one on the email?
I'll send her the email, I guess.
She should have one from Justin in her emails.
You sitting outside, Anita?
I got the window open. Why?
Yeah, can you hear the birds?
Okay. Yeah, I got lots of birds around here. You don't have birds where you are? You're out in the country, aren't you?
Yeah, but I don't have my windows open today. Yeah, we got lots of
Um,
birds too, yeah.
I don't have air conditioning, so I got windows open.
You don't have air conditioning, huh? Wow. You got some fans, at least
I
some
grew
ceiling?
up without air conditioning, so
Oh, really?
do what?
You got fans, ceiling fans and box fans or something?
Yeah, I don't have them on right now, but had to put them on once in a while. I got an older dog. He doesn't take too well to the heat, so I have to rev him up for him once in a while. But the other dogs will go outside and get in the shade and stuff, but he thinks he has to stay inside. So
Hmm.
I'd rather go out underneath the shade tree.
Hey, Todd. How you doing, Todd?
I'm doing good, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Sorry, I was running a little behind. I had made a contact with a cousin of mine, and we got talking about some family stuff, and then I was sharing it, and I kind of lost track of my time.
Oh, that's okay. We hadn't got anywhere yet. Laura said she was having some issues
I
getting
saw that
her.
on the chat. How are you, Anita?
Good. How are
I'm
you
doing
tonight?
good. Doing good. Is it raining down your way?
On and off all day. Some storms this morning, and it was rumbling a while ago. I think we are supposed to get some more about 7 o'clock.
Yeah, I noticed. I looked at the forecast. It looked like there's a chance most of the week this week, off and on, I guess. It's
Yeah, I think they just try to cover themselves. They put it on every day.
Yeah, well, maybe. I know we've been somewhat dry here. I don't know if you guys been dry or not.
Yeah, we've needed the rain for sure. Yeah,
So I guess everybody's been a bit dry to some extent, some more
yeah,
than others.
yeah. Todd,
What big city are you close to, Todd?
Florence.
Florence, okay. I should know my counties, but I don't
Well,
anymore.
I didn't know as much before, like when we moved up this way, it's because I was used to more central Kentucky, and I was actually more familiar with Louisville and Lexington at that point in time. So northern Kentucky or western Kentucky was kind of not on the radar for me.
All right.
But yeah, I'm like 25 minutes from Florence and about, depending on where you go, 40 to 50 minutes. I can be about anywhere in Cincinnati.
Oh, okay.
Todd, did you ever make any progress as far as converting your LLC?
Not 100%. Like, I kept getting like bits and pieces, and then like one time I had talked to Lisa Schaefer, and she had gave me some information. Well, then I was listening to one of the videos that Anna was on and Lisa was on, and Lisa had mentioned something, and then Anna was like, "Well, why are you doing it that way?" And then or something like that. And so it, I haven't got any like 100% clarity on anything. And then Chris on Marion had told me to reach out to Nick on Garrett because he's had several businesses. So I've kind of I actually reached out to him, and then I think he's changed his schedule, and then I didn't get to make that connection. But I think according to what he told me, he hasn't gone through all the process himself. So it may be one of these things I have to do a little bit by trial and error to get where I need to be.
Okay.
I've pretty much gotten rid of the LLC. My biggest concern now is moving forward because right now I'm conducting everything as basically the living man.
Okay,
But if I want to have a name for my business, I've been trying to figure out what's the best way to do that now in the private without basically getting back into anything that's tied to the corporation, because like a lot of these places they want you to have an EIN number and all this stuff, and then I, some people say, well, no, you don't have to do that, you can have this or that. So I'm just trying to confirm that before I jump in, so I've kind of taken it slowly.
all right. Hopefully you'll figure that out and be able to lead the charge for the rest of us. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
that would be great. That way, could save people a lot of headaches as we move forward. If you have
Yeah.
something, that we can share.
Welcome, Bob and Laura. How are you?
Doing well.
How you doing?
Oh, complaints here. Doing good. Well, I think we've got a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started. Apologize for not being here 2 weeks ago. I had a chance to take my kids to the lake. My folks have a house on a lake in Alabama, and they were there and had a spot where work wasn't too crazy, and had a chance to go down there, but I wasn't going to be able to do the meeting from down there with them. So uh, thanks for bearing with me on that.
Um, so you said you didn't have internet there. Is that the issue?
Well, I wasn't going to be able to bring the things that I needed to bring. I wasn't going to have my computer, which has
Because
everything that I need.
I was wondering, and I know this is kind of off subject, but since Todd is here, does Taylorsville Lake have internet access now?
That I don't know.
Just they used to not, but I don't know.
I don't know. I've still got to call them to find out about the pavilion. And I know you mentioned the one you said, was it by the spillway or something?
Yes.
I did get that, by the way. I meant that. I don't think I responded to that. So I'm gonna try to reach out this week, find out, because I know I talked to Joe Hayes and they go down there. He's more familiar with it. And then Chris also mentioned something about actually driving down there. And then he said if he found out anything, he was going to share. So we should know something here in the next week for sure about what pavilions, and then I can ask about internet if you want me to ask.
Yeah, because I would just appreciate it. I might not be able to pull up my notes and need them on paper, because we used to, do camps right near Bernheim at the Camp Crooked Creek, and there was no phone service there either. So,
Okay.
just to know how I'm going to present it, that would help me. Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome, Keith.
Greetings, everyone.
How are you?
Hey, Keith.
Hey,
All right,
Mr. Keith.
here's our agenda for tonight. We'll go ahead and read the Bevins decision. We'll talk just a little tiny bit about the election process. Laura, if you want to share something with litigation, I didn't really coordinate with you prior about that, but if there's something you want to share from the litigation committee, you'll have an opportunity to do that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the excellence of common law. Folks still in chapter 1. But some really good things to cover. Any questions about the agenda before we get started?
Just one question, Tom.
Sure.
That book, The Excellence of Common Law, you said we could pull that off Amazon
Um,
or no?
I think you can. Let me see if I can't find his website. His website sells it directly. If I'm not mistaken, his website is the Excellence of Common Law. Commonlawyer.com. That's his website.
Commonlawyer.com.
Commonlawyer.com, yes.
Okay.
And Brent Allen Winters, 958 pages. Book is $80. Ebook is $40. The study guide that goes along with it. So you can get it off of his website. I can't remember if he charged shipping or not.
Okay, I can look that up. That's no big deal. I just was going to kind of get the connection for that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's been a really good read. I mean, just about every page, I'm just kind of like, wow, the guy, he's really on top of it. It is kind of expensive. You volunteered to read the business decision?
Laura's got her hand up.
Laura?
I'll read the Bivens decision, but I was just going to ask if we could maybe move this meeting to before we got into the beef of it and to like 5:30 because they do the coordinator meeting at 7. So, and tonight they're doing it at 6, but it's not a coordinator meeting. It's a land meeting that somebody in Texas is doing. But I don't know if we go over, I'm going to have to be getting off at 7 for now on, other than for the next 2 weeks. So if we could maybe just move it till 5:30 so that we have an hour and a half that I mean, I don't know. I thought us as coordinators all needed to be on that call, but I guess I'm wrong on that. The Sunday night Terry Psalm call.
I'm not sure. The only meeting I was aware of that we were supposed to be at as coordinators was the Thursday night. But I might be wrong about that. But 5:30 works for me. I mean, my Sundays are open, so if 5:30 works for everybody else, I can make that happen with Justin.
I should be able to do that myself.
All right.
Thank you. You want me to start the Bivens?
Well, you know I could be there.
Sure, Laura, thank you.
This meeting is private. Bearing false witness, misrepresentation, and posting inflammatory rhetoric in public forums is forbidden and shall be addressed in an appropriate manner. To eliminate all conflict and false allegations, is there anyone in attendance at today's meeting that is a member or agent of any law enforcement agency or public agency of the federal, state, community, city, or township agencies present? Additionally, are there any U.S. citizens or citizens of the United States present? Anyone who is here under false pretenses, anyone who is working for any foreign government, including the territorial United States or the municipal United States, anyone who is being paid or coerced to be here must fully disclose their presence and purpose now or leave the premises. If they subsequently show up as federal witnesses, they are discredited for failure to disclose. Is there any response to the Bivens decision?
Thank you, Laura.
Am I supposed to ask it 3 times? Because they only do it once. So,
Just once.
okay.
Thanks, Todd.
Oh, you're welcome.
That sounds like a definite answer to me. I'm okay with that. Thank you. I apologize. I think I put in the agenda the Bevins decision. My bad on that. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Todd.
You're welcome. Laura, your hand's still up if you didn't realize.
Thank you.
I haven't gotten much further on this election process. However, I did look at a few of Anna's articles about the election process. However, when you when you put election in the search bar, it pulls up about 200 articles about the 2020 election. So it's kind of tough to sort through and find what you need to find doing it that way. But I did find this article titled "California at It Again," and I suppose it was about an issue that California was having with their election process. And Anna noted that there are explicit, simple instructions regarding this task. That is, the elections for assembly offices. They have been written down numerous times, and hours upon hours have been required to discuss something that is really no more difficult than following a recipe. So that made me feel good that there is something out there somewhere that is going to tell us very plainly, like a recipe, how to get our folks who have been nominated actually elected and put us on a little bit firmer ground as a Jural Assembly in that regard. But once again, finding it is going to be the issue. And maybe there's an assembly, maybe Ohio, maybe Arkansas, maybe there's some folks out there who can pinpoint the article, or if y'all know somebody that can ask directly that might know the article that it's in, or the document that contains this recipe, these simple instructions for doing our election. So far, it's been a white rhino for me, but anyway, we'll get there. This was from Keeping Track of the Federal Fence from January 4th, 2020, another an article. It said our public elections don't involve political parties, and we don't vote. We act as electors to elect people from among our population of state citizens to fill our public offices. As Americans have not been made aware of the falsification of their political status records and have been encouraged to assume that the corporate elections are their elections, fewer and fewer people and candidates have been available to fill our public offices. But that doesn't mean that we and our public offices have never ceased to exist. So the big thing takeaway there is we don't vote. We elect, and there is a difference. I couldn't verbalize to y'all what that difference is. I think it's, polling, from what I've understood recently, is polling is basically a popularity contest, and it's different than conducting an actual election. But the big thing for me was that there is a lot of information in her articles. It's just tracking it down and putting it together in one place.
May I?
Yes, please.
I believe like with their voting, they got the electoral process and different things where our votes really don't count, or the populace's votes, since we don't vote anymore. But when you elect someone, like each vote, doesn't it stand, counted, and it's not in a like an electoral thing, or it's each vote for vote, or elector or per elector, like we do when we vote on things. Are you understanding what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. And if I'm not mistaken, even in the corporate electoral college, those electors, they can vote however they want. They don't necessarily have to follow what the voters have said. Am I mistaken in saying that?
No, you're correct. That's what I get from Anna. Like ours aren't tainted like theirs are.
Yeah, so we are the electors, and what we elect is legit, and it can't be swayed. It can't be, all right, 95% of the people voted this way, but the electoral college, the electors can do whatever they want, because it is a poll. It's a poll for polling's sake, right? The voters going to the polls, they're saying, here's who we want. And the electors look at that and go, oh, wow, they want this guy, but we really want to choose this guy, put this guy in office. So it's not concrete. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, and my understanding is you have states like California and New York that have so much more electoral votes. You could have a state, I don't know, let's say Kentucky, and one guy can get 95% of the vote and still only get a few electoral votes. So those main states, with all the electoral votes, they could be, you know, one person could win by 1% and they still get all those electoral votes. So it's not it is a popularity contest with the corporation, whereas us we're a not a majority, but anyway, all our votes count.
Yes. I think that's a good way to put it. All of our votes count. I think that's a good way to put it, Bob. Whereas in the corporate, it's just a popularity contest and they don't really count. Right. And thank you for that. I didn't have a slide for it, but Laura, did you have anything you wanted to share for litigation committee tonight?
Not really. I'm sorry. If I'd have known a little bit sooner.
Yeah, that's I should have pinged you sooner about it. I did listen to half of that recording that you had from, I think it was Arkansas, and it was very interesting, but I found most of it was way over my head. And I guess you being experienced with the courts, you probably were able to grasp a lot more of that. But I suppose we'll all get to that point at somewhere.
The bad thing is it's still their court processes. Like even on Arkansas, they've got their court set up, but they're still having to deal with these corporate crooks. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. But if you went to listen further it was the July 23rd jam session of the Arkansas Jural Assembly. And there's somebody, I believe, did they say Daryl? I don't know. I sent the name in the email last night, but there's somebody in Kentucky jail from Arkansas too that they bring up on that. And that's what I was thinking, that maybe us as a Jural Assembly, since it's somebody in Kentucky, could assist the Arkansas Jural Assembly with.
Okay.
Did I say Daryl?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the name was Daryl. But we would have to reach out, and I don't mind reaching out to the Arkansas Assembly, but I don't have any of their emails or anything. But I'm sure I could figure it out between now and 2 weeks from now.
Did you say that Arkansas has their court set up?
Right, they do.
Wow. How long has that been going on? Do you know?
She got are you talking about Cheryl or when they got their court set up?
When they got their court set up.
They got their court set up in the fall. So
So they're doing it. They're doing it live.
but they're still having to go in and deal with corporate stuff and learn their stuff, because we're entangled with it. It's just, as much as we want to focus on just our law until our courts are up, we're still going to have to deal with their laws. And it does stink. But that's what's good about the Chevron difference is they're supposed to be held to the Constitution now.
Can you explain that a little bit? What did you call it? The Chevron difference?
Yeah, the Chevron difference. So they had a bunch of in 1984 they had Chevron versus, do you remember who it was versus? But they overturned it, and basically it was giving, I know the EPA was involved too. It was giving all the alphabet soup agencies and like CPS, it was giving them more control than the judge per se. That's why, you could go in and a doctor's testimony meant more than the judge or than what the judge thought. And now it's strictly kind of on the judges to follow the constitutions instead of letting all these third agencies speak as experts in the fields.
But the agencies are also setting up their own rules and regulations and not going through Congress. What's the big deal too.
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, good. Thank you, Anita.
So I have one question real quick, if I may.
Please.
So based on what you guys are talking about and this whole deal, like we were talking about with the three-letter agencies, and based off the way it's supposed to be, we should have laws which would be enacted by Congress, right? Following the Constitution, right?
Correct.
But then you get into statutes where you have, and I'm trying to distinguish the difference, because then you have all of these agencies and they have all of these codes and statutes, but they're not actually laws. Am I understand that correctly?
Correct.
So
The
then they're in,
the agencies took their own power on, and that was the big deal with the EPA last year. Somebody went after, well, the Supreme Court said last year the EPA need to stand down because they don't have the right to do codes and statutes on their own. But all these three-letter agencies were taking it on their own to take people to court and everything on stuff that didn't go through Congress.
right, and they're enforcing all of these codes and statutes as if they were law, but they're not law.
Right, yeah.
Right. And that's the big issue, is because basically they're saying you've got to do this because it's the law, but it's a code or a statute, so it's not really the law. So that's why this is being shot down or overturned now.
Yeah, everybody thinks codes and statutes are laws, but they're not. So that's why nobody stands up against it.
Right. But we've been fed those lies, so that's
Right. Correct.
anyway.
Yeah.
I yield on that. I just wanted to confirm that's my understanding was correct.
Well, that's a good
Well,
point.
and if you listen to Anna, the military's kind of taken over too. So I know it's taking power away from the agencies, but are we putting too much power into the military and the federal courts now? Because municipal's supposed to be going away, although my case hasn't gone away.
But if I'm not mistaken, the military's been in charge ever since 1860, Lieber Code, 1863.
Yeah,
Whenever
I think that's right.
to the Lieber Code, basically the military took over, and I don't know if that's really changed. I mean, all our courts are military courts based on the Lieber Code. That's why the gold fringe is around all the flags in court. So I don't know that that's ever changed.
And
Yeah,
that's
but you
exactly
also
when
have
the British took over the military.
Yeah.
Same year.
You also had the ruling from the Supreme Court that once our courts are up and standing, the military courts have to stand down. So they've already ruled on that.
Do you have any idea when that was, Anita?
No, I don't.
I just know in her calls, Anna's been saying that there's going to be more of a military presence now. I do know that it's been since the Lieber codes, and I remember, her saying before, but I guess now there's going to be more of a military presence with them taking out the municipal. And
Well, that makes sense. They've had we've just basically acquiesced to the military being in charge because we haven't known about it. But now that people are starting to wake up to it, I think you're right. They're probably going to make their presence more known. You see the police with the riot gear on more and more, just to intimidate us, because now we're starting to stand up a little bit. I did a little bit of research on the Lieber Code in the last couple of weeks, and just the audacity that Lincoln had to do the things that he did. I mean, he must have been being either paid very well or being coerced at the time, because he basically was completely unlawful in most of the stuff that he did. The Lieber Code, putting Congress his Congress back in session, the Emancipation Proclamation, General Order 100, which was the Libra Code. I mean, it was all him just acting on his own with no authority whatsoever. There was no American presence behind anything that he did. It's really,
Yeah, I
really
think there was a
sad.
lot of coercion there.
Yeah.
You know, they have a statue of him at the city of London, don't you?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he had a lot of British support behind that, but I really think that, you know, he went through with all of it, but I think he was having second thoughts later. Sometimes I wonder if that's why they killed him, because he was having second thoughts.
You know, I've had that thought too, Anita, that maybe he did at the end have second thoughts and was going to back off on the greenback issue and the central bank. But I read something that on his mother's side or his father's, one of the sides of his family was all Tories. They were very deep in the British allegiance.
1863, I believe that's the year the Emancipation Proclamation was given. And Anna told us the other night, look it up, look up exactly what that means, and it doesn't mean freeing anybody.
Right. Just made us all slaves.
Well, the Constitution guaranteed a slave owner that he could go across border to another state and claim his property. And whether that's right or wrong, that's what it says in the Constitution, that if you own a slave and he escapes, you have the right to cross the border into the other state, find him and take him back. With the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln says, on his own, with no American representation, he says, if a slave escapes and crosses the border, he's a free man. Now, of course, everybody's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. You've got your freedom, but the Constitution says no. It's completely unconstitutional. But he did it anyway, and in that document, he says the executive is going to enforce this decree. Right, so right there, he's basically saying, I'm the executive, I'm in charge, I'm going to enforce this completely unlawful decree that I'm issuing. So,
You know, back then that they had extradition laws, but they just ignored them because you technically can't go across state lines without that state's permission to return that person. And that's been around a long time.
interesting.
Well, that's something big in like our CPS case, because they moved our daughter across state lines without an ICPC. So, I mean, going across state lines is still a major issue today. They didn't want to send our daughter to our family members because they were all out of state. But then they got left with that was the only option they had. So, but when they sent her to Arkansas, they didn't have an ICPC. So it was totally illegal for our worker.
Wow. Wow. You should be able to hammer them on that.
We're working on federal claims now. So that's supposed to be a better thing with this Chevron difference too. You know, the federal courts recognizing the lower courts corruption, or that's just me saying that way because I've been through it, but you know.
All right. We'll move on to excellence of the common law. Found this quote on page 44, and I thought it was important to take with us as we go through tonight. He says, God never calls all to be trial lawyers and judges, Nevertheless, however, he does call all to know the scriptures and proclaim the truth. So if you have a chance to start reading this book, one thing that he makes very clear is that you have to know the law in the Bible, God's law in the Old Testament, because that's what our foundation is for the common law. So important that we have a good foundation there. And we'll get back to a little bit more of that later. Due process is another big thing in the common law, and I ran across, he mentions due process on page 37 and gives a real kind of nice packaged definition of what due process is. And I really like this. And I think it's important for us all to, as jurors, to know what due process is, to have a really solid idea of what due process is. And he says that it's the notice of the time and place of hearing and a meaningful opportunity to be heard. So that's kind of like step number one in common law is due process. And so I kind of wanted to break that down and get the meat of that sentence. And so the big three things that stuck out to me is, number one, there's a notice. All right, so there has to be a notice of the hearing. You have to be notified. So somebody who's charged of something, they have to be notified. So that's the first thing we make sure as jurors. Hey, were you notified of a hearing? Number two, were you given a time and place to be heard? Right. So were you notified? Were you given a time and place to be heard? And number three, did you have a meaningful opportunity to be heard? And I struggled to kind of figure out, well, in what instance would you not be given a meaningful opportunity? And I guess a show trial might be an example of where, hey, yeah, we're here to hear, but we're really not going to give you an opportunity to talk, or the judge cuts you short, or something else happens. But there has to be a legitimate, meaningful chance for that person to be heard. So those three things I thought. So I really like that that description of due process. Go ahead, Laura.
That's one of the municipal court's tricks, is not letting you be heard. We asked for ADA access to court on July 18th, and the judge told me she overruled our jurisdiction, which I told her she couldn't. But eventually she hung up on us. So it goes very much against their ADA laws, but she would not let us speak. And I was even trying to tell her, we were practicing, the first article of the Constitution. She's like, oh, I'm trying to give you that. But she muted me. She would not and never has let me speak in court because they know I've done nothing. That's why they use a mental card. So I think that happens in most of their courts. The poor victims don't get to speak, and that's part of their tricks. And I think that's something that we will have steady in our courts after going through the trials of being in their courts. These people will get to be heard, just like the Constitution intended. And I yield.
That's a perfect example of that meaningful opportunity. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
But
yeah,
isn't that the process in their courts? That's why you have to have an attorney, because you're considered a dead person. You're not allowed to speak. Only attorney can speak. So that's what she's used to doing. So.
Right. And I technically don't have an attorney. They made us have an attorney in case we had questions, but we made it very clear we were representing ourselves, that we were living men and women that could speak for ourselves, is pretty much how I worded it, and not minors. We have reached the age of majority, because you're still considered a minor if you haven't taken over your estate anyway in their court of law. So Bob at 65, when all this started, was still a minor because he didn't claim the age of majority and get his estate, is what I'm getting from the law videos. I watched that urlaw.com or on YouTube. I yield.
Yeah, and you're not incompetent either, right? That's, as soon as you hire an attorney, you're basically saying, I can't handle my own affairs. I need to have a representative.
That's
So
exactly right. But they can't prosecute somebody who's incompetent or an idiot. And I've seen some people try and pull that card. And I'm like, I'm not going into court and saying I'm an idiot or incompetent. I'll figure it out, But they're not supposed to be able to prosecute somebody that's incompetent either.
Yeah, I agree. Page 45, he says, all are to prepare themselves to discern facts and apply the law when called upon to do so as the jury. The following are 12 examples of common law first principles all ought to know. So he lists these 12 common law first principles, and I thought it was really good. It's pretty brief, and I'm going to try to get through these fairly quickly, but I really like the way he broke a lot of these things down. So we'll go through these 12 things. Number one, in common law tradition, political office holders derive their immediate authority from the people they serve by the people's invitation and under their advice and consent. So what do we see now is all these politicians have all this power, but it's upside down, right? They're supposed to have their authority from us, from the people's invitation and under their advice and consent. Number two, executive officers and magistrates are servants of the people and are under the same law as all the people. Once again, the people are in charge, right? We, the people, are at the top of the food chain. Everyone else works for us. Number three, the common law tradition subjects government office holders and magistrates to impeachment and removal. Once again, there are employees. So we have the ability, the authority, the power to say, you're not welcome here. I mean, do we have the power to impeach the president anymore? I mean, no, that the representatives have to do that. None of us have any power to do that, but we're supposed to. We're supposed to be able to do that. For government officers and other magistrates are foremost responsible to God, devoted above all to the law, and in direct accountability to the people to apply the law to themselves, to enforce the law, and to resist illegal acts of offenders in and out of government. So we're all responsible to God, to know the law, and accountable. And that last part, to resist illegal acts of offenders in and out of government, the first thing that came to my mind was bribes. All these kickbacks, L Street in Washington, all the lobbyists. None of that is supposed to be going on, but it exists because we're not in common law. And so I wanted to go to scripture and find out what it says about bribes, just to kind of solidify the understanding there. And Exodus 23:8 says, "You shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right." So it just makes everything cloudy, right? We're supposed to be accountable to the scripture, accountable to God, accountable to the people. But if we're taking money from the outside, it blinds the clear-sighted. The wicked accepts a bribe in secret to pervert the ways of justice, from Proverbs 17:23. You shall not pervert justice, you shall not show partiality, and you shall not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. Deuteronomy 16:19. So speaking our language, right? I mean, this is all the stuff that we want to hear about the common law and where we're going with this. Number five, neither the people nor their representatives nor the chief of state legislate or make original or new law, but they discover and apply timeless principles of right. So that was interesting to me, and I don't know what y'all think, but I don't know if I've heard that our once we have our government back together, the people that we elect, I mean, is this, I think what he's saying here is they're not supposed to make new laws. Do I have that right? Or is that, am I wrong about that? I mean, basically what he's saying is that we're supposed to take what we've been given in the common law and be that jury, be that that justice and apply the timeless principles of right to that. And it makes sense because I think God's given us everything that we're supposed to have. And Deuteronomy 4:2 is one of my favorite verses. He says, "You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, and you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you." So there's that idea that he's already given us everything. The common law already has everything. It doesn't need anything to muddy the waters. I thought that was an interesting observation. Number 6, he says, common law entitles to all persons due process of law, knowing that only by focusing on fair play can one hope for a fair outcome. Historically, common lawyers have recognized the indispensability of due process, Magna Carta calling it the law of the land. It's due process, so it's so important that you can encapsulate it, the Magna Carta, with one phrase: the law of the land. It's due process. We have to make sure we've got those 3 things: that notification, time and place, meaningful opportunity to be heard, right? Number 7, common law forbids the government's executive and legislative powers from meddling with the courts. So what's Biden apparently supposed to be doing now? He's supposed to be working the courts before he leaves office. He wants to massage the courts in the way that he wants, but that should never happen. The courts are ours. We as the jury are going to make sure that government stays out. Number 8, the common law jury are an indispensable foundation stone for common law freedoms, where the jury operates a right, the government lawfully acts against the life, liberty, or property of the individual only with consent of the jury. So in other words, just as it mentioned, the government can't come in and meddle with the courts because we, the jury, stand between them and our courts, right? So the same thing. The government can't come in and tell anyone to do anything unless we give them permission to do so. Right. So let's say the government wants to fine somebody or take their property or whatever they want to do. We have the ability as a jury to say, no, you can't, or yes, you can. So that's the beauty and the power of our jury. And unlike the Greek republics and old Roman Republic and their progeny, which have passed and continue to pass from existence, the teachings of Scripture undergird the common law, thus its lasting steadiness. When I read that, number one, I almost disagreed with what he was saying, that the Roman Republic is passing away. I mean, we have the same Roman eagle on most of our seals and flags, and that all that's been borrowed. The Nazis had an eagle, Romans had an eagle, we've got an eagle. We still have Roman civil law. I'm not sure what he means by it's passed away. I still see it in a lot of different places, but the other part of that is the lasting steadiness of the common law. And so I think going forward as jurists, like it said, we have to be accountable to the law. We have to know the Scriptures. And I think if our attitude is, well, the Old Testament is the Old Testament, it was for a different time, different people, then our foundation, I don't think, is going to be as solid as it needs to be. We have to be fully rooted in the belief that common law comes from the Old Testament teachings and writings. And so in that spirit, I thought of some verses. The first one from Psalm 119, considering your testimonies I have known of old, you have founded them forever. So according to David, the laws, the commandments of God, they last forever. Jesus backs up that regard. Nothing, a lot of people will say, well, the New Testament came along and changed a bunch of things. But Jesus says himself, the word, which is the Old Testament, the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. he doubles down on that, which he says in John chapter 5, if you believe Moses, and Moses' writings are the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, the Pentateuch. If you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, Moses' writings, the Torah, how will you believe my words? So you have to have solid foundation in the Old Testament, not only to execute common law, but to believe properly in Jesus, because the Old Testament is basically all about Jesus. And then just to hammer that point home, he says in Matthew 5:17, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets, which is a good thing, because that's what we're trying to get back to. We're trying to get back to the law and prophets as the foundation for our courts. Number 10, the common law's fundamental distinguishing principles are as much confirmed customs arising from habit of mind as they are written standards of law. And I really struggled with this one to figure out what he was trying to say, that they are customs from habit of mind as they are written standards of law. I didn't really have a good idea what his point was in number 10. Can anybody make anything out of that one?
Can I say something, Tom?
Please.
My only thought, and it just hit me, is I would think that if we are raised from a biblical, God-centered mindset within our families, that we would be passing these things along to our children, and it would be a habit that we would live by. It'd be a way of life that would be kind of ingrained in us fundamentally, and that if we do that on a consistent basis, and then we pass that along, then that would be kind of forming a habit in the minds of our children. So even if there was not a written law, that oral tradition, which you read about in the Bible, would be passed along. Because if you don't pass that along, it eventually would die out. That's my thought initially. I yield.
I think you're right, and as you were mentioning that, I remembered Paul talking about the Gentiles who don't have the law, but execute the things in the law, right? In other words, a Gentile who didn't know anything about the commandments, but it's on their heart, and they're living correctly without knowing what's written down. That's as important as having the law and reading it and knowing about it, right? So I think that's a good point, Todd. Thanks for mentioning
You
it.
don't have to have a law to know what's right to do.
Yeah, he can put it on your mind and your heart. That's true. Good point.
May I?
Please.
So when this was written, they probably didn't have the technology on the subconscious mind. But, you run 90% from your subconscious mind on autopilot. So if it's been taught and it's in your subconscious, and, I think that you live it out is basically kind of what it's saying. But to build on Bob's words, he does say he's written the law in our hearts, and he's given us knowledge of him in our hearts. That's why nobody should be able to reject him, because he's already put it in our hearts that he is real. That's somewhere in scripture. You probably know that. But I just think, when you think of the subconscious mind, that's kind of what this is speaking of. It's just they didn't have that terminology when it was printed.
Yeah, those are all good points.
Hey, Tom, I have one more point on that.
Please.
Kind of based off of Laura made me think of it when actually her and Bob were mentioning it, talking about that former point. So because of lack of, I want to say technology, resources, not everybody would have had, even if they would have had written law, not like we might have 5 or 10 Bibles or something in our house today. They wouldn't have had that. They wouldn't have had access. That's why it was so important that you had it written in your mind. And that's why the oral tradition was so important, is that you would commonly discuss it, talk about it, because you didn't have a book, wasn't as readily as accessible as it is for us today. So I think that's why it's, very important to have that. That's what I'm thinking anyway. I yield.
I agree.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Reminds me of Joshua chapter 1, where God tells Joshua, "Hey, this law is supposed to be on in your mind. You're supposed to be talking about it 24 hours a day." But you're right; it wasn't written down, so they had to have it in their mind. So. Good points. Thanks for helping me to figure that one out. 11, common law country vouchsafes that government remains limited by insisting upon separate but equal government powers and ongoing rivalry and tension. Each of the 3 branches of government has proven eager and determined to maintain its prerogatives against the encroachment of the other 2. I didn't really know where to put this one because, as Anna says, our 3 branches of government are the federation, the territorial, and the municipal. We've been taught wrong about those 3 branches of government. So I didn't really quite know where to, kind of what to do with number 11 here either.
She was just speaking of that, or I just read an article to that, because in school we were taught that there's an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. But in reality, like, there's the municipal branch and the territorial. It's not what we were taught. That's part of why we are so confused when we walk into court. I knew my rights and stuff just from general education, but my general education was just indoctrination, and they were lying through it because we don't have a judicial branch and a legislative branch. We've got these municipal and territorial Tories in there. Ayo.
And I would, and if it's true that our actual 3 branches are the federation, the territorial, municipal, then they're not equal, right? The territorial and municipal are subcontractors. They work for the American people on the federation, so they're not equal. So I didn't really know what to do with this one, but I included it because there were 12 of them. So,
Well,
and
they
we'll come
came
back.
in and converted our judicial branch and our executive branch, is what they did, without fully letting us know that they became municipal and territorial. So that's part of why we're here. We're going to set up those branches again.
Yeah. All right, number 12, common law demands that government practice restraint in 2 ways. First, by respecting individual rights, so that each person feels an independent duty to obey God's desires or his commandments. That was my addition. Even where a command of the state, which is a statute, code, or ordinance, clearly conflicts. Second, by preserving the right to trial by impartial jurors that know their common law duty to judge the facts and apply the law. So I thought this one was a good way to end the list. So government has to practice restraint. When was the last time it's done that? Right? But when we have our jury set up, they're going to practice restraint because we're going to make sure that government allows a person to obey God's commandments, even if it conflicts with a state statute, code, or ordinance. Right? And so the first thing I immediately thought of was Leviticus chapter 25. And it's one of my favorite verses in scripture. He says, for the children of Israel are servants to me, to God. They are my servants who I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Why did he bring them out of Egypt? so they didn't have to obey Pharaoh anymore, right? So that they could only obey God. When they were in Egypt, they couldn't even worship God. Pharaoh wouldn't let them go 3 days to worship. And so he had to get them out of there so they would no longer obey Pharaoh, so they could only have a clear channel to the Father to obey him only. Right? That's what he wants. And that's what it says right here. We're to obey God's commands and tell the state to pound sand. Right. And so I thought that was a really good solidification of what I've been led to believe is that I'm called to obey him. My allegiance is not to a flag or to a country. My allegiance is to the Almighty Father. And I obey his laws and commands. And if somebody comes along and says, hey, you need to do this, that, and the other, I say, wait a minute. My jury is going to get in here and be a wall and say, no, 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 no. He has the right, that individual right to obey God first. And then, of course, Jesus says no one can serve two masters. So the idea of having one foot in Egypt and obeying Pharaoh and one foot in the wilderness obeying the commandments from Sinai, that doesn't work. That doesn't fly in his kingdom. So declaring our status, getting where we are, that's the right thing to do. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, the one word you don't see in that anywhere is opinion. Your opinion does not matter.
No.
You got to follow God's law, not your opinion.
Right. That's a great point. Great point. You're right. We don't have a say, right? That our flesh is supposed to be crucified. So what we want doesn't matter. Our mind is supposed to be locked in step with his. And the only way we do that is to know his word and obey, trust and obey, right?
I would just like to make a point.
Please.
So for me, when I was raising my boys who had a demonic father, and we got to the scripture of honor thy mother and thy father, that was my determining point, as it says in the Lord. So he was asking them to do things that were ungodly because we were in direct conflict. We were unevenly yoked and they were still seeing him, So that's how I had to teach my kids, because they were, they had basically the Satan and an angel for parents, and they have to listen to God. That's all I can do is lead you to God and expect him to lead you, and you don't do anything unless it's in the Lord. You're supposed to honor your mother and father, but you do that through the Lord. So if it doesn't align with the Lord's ways, then you don't honor what they're asking you to do, which is hard for kids, with two parents and they love them both. So that's just kind of how I set them on that one, because there was so much division between us and I was trying to unify with the Lord, and I yield.
That's a tough spot when you've got two parents telling you different things. I can't even imagine how tough that's got to be. But you're right. You gotta give them the right path to follow. Go ahead, Todd.
I just want to say one thing you were talking about, which was what I totally agree with, talking about your allegiances to God. And one of the things I've had a problem with is when we think about the flags, and of course we know the war flag, and we've been told all our lives that that's got to fly above any other flag, even your Christian flag.
Hmm.
And to me, that's always kind of been, I just didn't understand, because again, like you said, our allegiance is to be to God first and no one else. So if your allegiance is to God, then and to me that would be reversed. If you were using it in a flag situation, then your Christian flag would be above any other flag, because that would represent your allegiance to God there. And that's why I never understood that. I'm like, they're telling us that we need to have allegiance to our country above everything, and that's wrong.
Yeah.
I yield.
Yeah, that's a great point. They took God out of the schools, and they replaced it with this Pledge of Allegiance. And I never gave it a thought all through school. I said it every day. I never even thought about it. I just thought it's the right thing to do. But
I don't think any of us did,
right. we were never told any different. But when you do think about it, how can you pledge allegiance to two different entities? How can you say I pledge allegiance to the flag and everything that the United States of America stands for, but I also go to church and I worship an Almighty God? Well, which one is it? Where you can't? I don't think you can divide allegiance. You either have allegiance one place or another. I don't.
Well, that's your scripture there, Matthew 6:24. You can't serve those, two masters.
Right, and that's the power of that verse exactly, is that you can't. Which one are you going to do? And that was one of the driving forces that really led me to declare my status. Is that I realized for a long time that spiritually I've been status corrected through the blood of the Messiah. Right, spiritually, I'm not in Egypt anymore. I'm not subject to the bondage of sin anymore. I've been redeemed and removed from there spiritually. But my flesh, where is my flesh? My flesh was firmly planted in Egypt, right? Paying taxes, accountable to all the statutes and codes. My status was an Egyptian in my flesh body. Well, until he comes down and converts us all to our resurrected bodies, I've got to drag this flesh along with the spirit. And I thought, well, if I can align my flesh with the spirit and have them both in the wilderness waiting to go to the promised land, and that would be great. And in that capacity, my spirit can worship the Father unencumbered, and my flesh is right there with it. So that's what Leviticus 25, that verse says to me. He says, no, you're no longer subject to Pharaoh. Now you're my servants, and you're going to do things my way. The second part of that, preserving the right to trial by impartial jurors to know that their common law duty judge facts and apply the law, right? Probably number two, we got to know what due process is. Number two, we got to make sure that we're doing nothing but judging facts and applying what's already there, not making up something new. We know the facts and we know the law well enough to apply it and get justice for our people. Any questions on those 12 things?
No, great job, Tom.
What's that?
Great job, though.
Doesn't the Bible technically say that flags are idols?
I'm
Might
not.
be right.
I don't know scripture in particular, but I could see how it could be considered that.
Yeah.
I think there's something in Isaiah about it. But I just remember hearing preachers, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago say that we were worshiping the flag as Americans and it was a form of idolatry. And, I think that that's something to be careful of. I think Christians don't necessarily do that, but I do think that non-Christians seem to kind of, idolize the flag. And that's some of how, like, the CIA and how they target people if they're, doing the American flag right now or that kind of thing, because they're trying to rid of us of our laws for the new one or order. Excuse me.
Well, I think you need to look at it as a unity type thing. I mean, you just come together under the flag. It's not, I wouldn't say anybody worships it. It's just like I said, everybody comes together with it. But the military can manipulate any way they want to do it. You just have to have it in your mind the right way to look at it.
Yeah.
I think maybe possibly the only thing that would maybe push us towards worshiping, if you will, is the fact when we declare the allegiance to the flag, which we just discussed, which
Right.
represents the things of the corporation, because it's not even It's not even the flag that we have as status corrected Americans, which is the civil flag, which is
Right, and that
peace.
was their policy to put it into the schools.
Right, to brainwash everybody.
Right.
And the only thing, and you know, getting back to like what Laura mentioned about, you know, flags and maybe having idols or whatever, when you look at the Christian flag, you're pledging allegiance to God. Uh, and I think we can make an idol out of anything. Uh,
Right.
but especially I think when we do something that usurps authority over God, and that's to me that's when Tom was talking about that and that whole, you know, pledging allegiance to God is that's when we have to look. You know, I was always proud and still proud to be an American, but that is down the line from me being a Christian and being a believer in Jesus Christ and you know, uh, the one true God, the only God, because without Him, none of this other would matter anyway. So I think anytime we put anything, you know, it could be your spouse, it could be our children, it could be at some point in time, if we elevate anything above God, that becomes our idol. It doesn't matter, you know, it could be a person, it could be a place, it could be a thing. And that would be the only thing I think we could fall in that line potentially with the flag. Because I'm like Anita, I don't think in particular, we don't look at it as, oh, I worship the flag, like we think of like the idols they had back in the Old Testament times. And maybe even New Testament, you know, they had these little carved images and they prayed to them or whatever. I don't think necessarily people pray or, you know, something, but I do think sometimes we hold things so near and dear to our heart that that still is above God. I yield.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I don't know. It's real Christians. I don't think you need something to pray to because God knows your intentions and He knows your heart. So for you to have something to, like you say, pledge allegiance, all that stuff, we don't need that because God already knows. He knows our intentions. He knows our heart.
Yeah, I think you're right, and like you were saying, Todd. What I think it all boils down to what's important to you. You know, if you're going to put an American flag on bumper sticker on your car, um, I think you have to ask yourself, am I just as, you know, you're basically saying this flag, my country is important to me. Are you just as willing to put a flag, a Christian flag up there or a sticker that says, I believe in Almighty God? And if you're not willing to do that, well, then maybe your priorities aren't where they need to be. Maybe it's a little bit more important to you than it should be. I don't know. As far as a flag itself goes, remember all 12 tribes when they disassembled the tabernacle and marched on to their next place in the wilderness. They all went in order, and they all had a flag to identify, you know, where the tribes, because they all had specific places where they would camp around the tabernacle, and so there were flags associated, or banners, I guess they called them, for each of the 12 tribes. Certainly wasn't an object of worship, I don't think. Although I think the American flag could definitely fall into that category for some people.
So the biblical text in Isaiah 49 or 44, 9 through 20, you idiot idolatries, you chop down a tree, use half of it to cook your food, and turn the other half into something that you claim as alive and then treat it as such. So our flag, our military flag, definitely, we treat it like it's alive. It's a false entity. So, you know, and then it says idols then demand sacrifices from humans, which is in Psalms 106:38. So, you know, that's my point is our war flag does definitely, people are killing for it. And it seems like it just seems like it's an idol to me. From what I've read of scripture. Because we're supposed to be peaceful, like we claim to be in the assembly, but that war flag just in itself stands for war. So, and many people have been killed under the guise of the flag. So it kind of proves um, the biblical context correct to me.
Well, and I think in that the problem is no one's ever been taught that. We found out because we realized something was wrong and we status corrected. But you ask your average American, they don't even know what the civil flag is. They don't even know there is a civil flag and that there's a peace flag. So, and I agree with Bob. Bob, you were right. God knows our heart, and we don't have to have anything to pray to or anybody to pray to, only to God alone. I do think, though, however, if we want to share our beliefs, or the things that are important to us, which we typically do, it's a common thing. I mean, look at all the football stuff or basketball teams and all how they got these flags on their car, or they got their name, or, they got shirts with stuff. You know, we shouldn't be ashamed to represent Jesus Christ and to fly something, even people have mentioned that the cross can be an idol. People worship the cross. We don't need to worship anything but God alone. But I do think we can represent our love for Christ and show these things. It's just, I think maybe it's how we represent those things. If we put emphasis on the thing over God, or is it just something to represent our belief in God? I think it's, what's the intent behind it is the big thing.
Yeah.
I yield.
No, that's a great point. What is your intention? As you're talking, I just thought of the second commandment, Exodus chapter 20. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So those Jesus fish immediately popped into my mind when I started to consider that verse really hard for the first time. It says no likeness of anything. I used to have a license plate on the front of my truck that the wings, aviator wings, and I drove around with that for a long time. But when I read that verse and I thought really hard about it, you shall have any likeness of anything that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So I took that off my car. I was like, I don't want anything that I represent that could be mistaken as more important to me than my faith. I think you're right. I think the cross is a carved image of a thing. We're not to have any. He says, do not have anything that's important to you other than that faith. The cross can be controversial. I don't want to get in a big argument about that because it might be important to people. But it's all about what is important to us. And if we're going to put it on our car, on our shirt, out in public, and say this is important to me, is it more important than your faith? Are you just as willing to advertise your faith in the Almighty and to, like that first one of those first slides, we're supposed to proclaim the truth, right? I'm proclaiming the American flag is important to me. Am I just as willing to proclaim the truth to any stranger on the street, or that I drive by, or that I walk by, or whatever, right? So,
Well, I think the best way you can worship God is just by the way you live. I mean, that should tell it all right there. Because if you claim to worship God, but you don't live it, the people are just going to look at you like you're something else. There's something wrong with you.
yeah. Exactly, Bob. I mean, what was the job of Israel? They're to be a light to the nations. Not a bulldozer, not to stuff the word down their throats, but people were to look at Israel as they marched through Moab, through Edom, all these countries that they're marching through, and everybody was supposed to look at them and go, "Wow, they're really blessed. I want to be like them." That's, like you said, Bob. That's our job, is to be that example. People should look at us and go, "Man, I want what they've got." And how do I do that? Go ahead, Laura. Oh, do you have your hand up? Sorry.
I did. I was trying to take it down.
Okay.
I put the article that about flag idolatry in there. My concern is it's basically worshiping a dead entity, and I feel like that is why we're in the situation that we are with these corporate governments. Like everyone expects the government to save them and not God. So it's kind of like Satan set up and we know he's all through our government, and they want our government to save them. And this is just what I see from the general populace, you know. I mean, especially the ones that are living off everything from the government. Like we had a neighbor that they paid her water, her, you know, everything. And she was a huge Biden supporter because she was socialism. But you know, so they're expecting the government to save them and not God. And that's one of the things that frustrates me with our government and how it sets itself up. It's a dead corporate entity that's asking for worship. So it's an idol in and of itself, just our government, in my opinion. And
That's great. Thanks for posting that. I'll look forward to reading that because it's a tough one. It's definitely an important thing for all Americans. American flag. So, good discussion. Anything else we need to throw around before we adjourn? We get a vote? Go ahead.
Tom, I've sent you the article from Anna. I texted to you because I didn't know how to put it into the chat. But
Okay.
the ex parte Milligan was in 1866 when the Supreme Court ruled it, because that's when all the British courts were being set up. So they said since there wasn't any common law courts, that once they came back in, they would have to, the military courts would have to stand down. So I texted to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Anita. Yeah, I got it.
will you
And
put that in
also,
the chat with all of us?
I don't know how to do that. Maybe Tom can do it.
Oh, I was just talking about our group text. I figured if you could text it to Tom, you could put it in that group text. But okay, thank you.
I didn't know how to do it. I'm not very phone savvy. But and also, Tom, I was gonna ask everybody. I know we don't have all the legalities as far as holding our elections and everything, but I was just thinking, wouldn't it be all right for me to go ahead and write up a letter to send out to all the assembly members that we're going to get ready to hold our elections, and that anybody that wanted to be on the ballot or had somebody to nominate, to send it in to you, Tom, and then we could get, because they're all going to have to be vetted. So I was just thinking maybe we could go ahead and do that, start that process anyway.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds great, Anita. I don't know where that is in the recipe that Anna was talking about, but I'm sure it's somewhere. So
Right. Yeah.
absolutely.
I didn't know if you could talk to Lisa or one of the other assemblies that have started the process, but I don't see any reason why we can't go ahead and have people nominate and, just tell them that they're going to have to be vetted, and that we're just trying to get the court system set up. But I'll be happy to write up a letter and send it to you.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Anita.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I put that in the chat for you all. The article that Anita sent.
Yes, thank you. I've opened it. It's 4 pages. I'll read it one more time.
All right. Yeah. Hey, great discussion tonight, y'all. I really appreciate y'all being here. I think we're building a pretty good foundation together, and we're supposed to be a family, an assembly, and so I appreciate y'all being here so we can get to know each other and be that family. So appreciate your time. And motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
Thanks, Todd, and Bob, a second.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
When
Todd.
are we adjourning to?
Put that back up on the screen there, just to make it
The
official.
11th.
Yeah, it's, August 11th at, well, I'll make that 5:30. I'll get that taken care of with Justin. We'll do 5:30 on the 11th. Y'all have a great
Good night,
night.
everybody.
Good night,
Great
everybody.
weekend.
Thanks
See y'all
again, Tom.
Tuesday. All right.
Yeah, good night.
Good night.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.